Hello, my name is Kamilla Elliot. I am Professor of Literature and Media in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. And this brief video addresses 5 things you need to know about 19th century British Gothic literature in about 5 minutes. So let's start with the 5 things. The first is the settings. And generally, if it's outdoors, it's wild, whether it's urban jungle of London or the woods, and it's often at night. But it's mainly set in buildings, and these buildings have secret passages, hidden rooms, locked doors. Inside these rooms, Gothic villains are doing mysterious, ominous, harmful, evil, monstrous, unnatural, supernatural things that blaspheme religion, violate moral codes and break laws. They harm and they destroy the vulnerable. And in the process, all of this arouses feelings of dread, horror, terror, disorientation, shock, anguish and despair in characters and readers. Characters often feel remorse as well in Victorian Gothic, and readers talk about the pleasures and thrills of experiencing these dreadful emotions. So let's flesh this out with a few examples. Let's look at Gothic settings in 3 key 19th century Gothic books. The first one is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The second is Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And both of these use a secret laboratory, and in the case of Jekyll and Hyde, an anatomical theatre in which they conduct monstrous supernatural experiments. Additionally, Frankenstein goes outdoors, pursuing nature to her hiding places, describing the horrors of his secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, so he's a grave robber, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay. He also got animal body parts from the abattoir to make his monster. Dracula is our third example by Bram Stoker. Famously, the locked castle high on a mountain in Transylvania, the ship, the coffin, and the bedroom are other spaces that are claustrophobic, where people are trapped. They can't get away on the ship, the sailors can't escape. Dracula eventually can't get out of his coffin, and the young girls upon whom he preys, and also Harker, the young man, the bedroom. So these places of confinement. So let's look at 2 and 3 in our 3 examples. Frankenstein's goal is to create a race of beings who will worship him as their creator. This is blaspheming the work of God in creating humanity in many different religions, but specifically in the 19th century, this would be blaspheming the Christian religion. Jekyll wants to separate good from evil so that he can do immoral deeds with impunity as a separate being and get away with it. Dracula's feeding on human blood is a parody of Christian communion, where Christians drink the blood of Christ to gain eternal life. I think perhaps more than parody, it's travesty and horror. So let's have a look at the victims. I mentioned these were often vulnerable people. So in Frankenstein, it's a child, a young female servant, Frankenstein's wife as she waits for him on their wedding night. Frankenstein also destroys the female monster he was making for his male monster, and at the end they are vying to destroy each other. In Jekyll and Hyde, Hyde tramples a young girl, hits a prostitute, murders an elderly MP. And at the end, he destroys Jekyll, his maker. But again, you can't quite tell, is it Hyde who destroys Jekyll or Jekyll who destroys Hyde? There's something about the monsters that are tied up with the people who made them. Dracula preys on all kinds of underlings, the villagers beneath his castle, the man he hires as a legal assistant, Renfield, who worships him and wants to be like him, the sailors he's hired to take him to London, Londoners, especially young girls, and one of these young girls then preys as a vampire on children. So we see these vulnerable people oppressed by established either upper class or professional class men in these books. Finally, Gothic Emotions. Frankenstein, I've got quotations here now. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me which nothing could extinguish. The idea that hell isn't out there, it's not a punishment awaiting me. It's inside me and I can't escape it. Characters describe being overcome by pain and anguish, torn by remorse, horror and despair. In Jekyll and Hyde, when the maid witnesses the murder of the MP, at the horror of these sights and sounds, she loses consciousness, she faints. And then Jekyll has a horror of his other self. That insurgent horror was knit to him closer than a wife, closer than an eye. Again, this sense that the evil that you fear is inescapable because it is you and it is within you and it was created by you. Dracula's victims groan in anguish that not even hope could soften. They are dazed and stupid with pain and terror. They shudder in horror. The ending, of course, is different here. Dracula doesn't feel remorse at all and doesn't really have much of a voice or a sense of subjective presence, and he is destroyed by a group of protagonists coming together. Finally, further reading. If you're interested in knowing more, we have YouTube videos, longer ones addressing Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, and The Woman in Black, which is a more contemporary Gothic. And then we have, I suggest these two books by Nick Bloom and Fred Botting. They will tell you about Gothic, not just in the 19th century, but how it's expanded and changed in more recent works and in films, television, and other media. Thank you for listening.